Welcome to Jared Scott Outdoors, your source in the field for local outdoor news. This week on Jared Scott Outdoors, we're heading out after coyotes. Now I've got Jacob Newman, Frontier Wildlife Taxidermist, and Jacob and I have gone on lots of different hunts together. We usually have a good time. They're not always successful. In fact, usually they're not successful, but we have a good time and some crazy things that happen. And so anyways, we're gonna head out for coyotes. We've done this a few different times over the years, unsuccessfully, I think.
Yeah, we're
so this year we're hoping to actually get one between the two of us. Hopefully one of us will. We'll get some on camera. Either way, we're sure to have a good time. Let's get after it. All right, so the plan for Jacob and I is basically we're just going to cruise around to some areas that we know hold coyotes, hike up into some higher points so we've got an area that we can look at and set up and do some calling. Hopefully we can get some coyotes in. There's a lot of things you kind of got to factor in, distance and especially the wind. That's going to be the biggest thing, is making sure the wind is right so that if there are some coyotes, they can't wind us before we even see them. Anyways, that's kind of our plan. We're gonna snowmobile around, check out some different areas and just try moving from one spot to another and see if we can't get some luck. Jacob and I got started at first light and climbed up to a high point overlooking a nice draw that I hoped would hold some coyotes. Setting up and getting some calls started, we waited but saw nothing. We did call in a few magpies and crows, but that didn't do us any good. The snow was a little deep getting to this point, and we noticed that we really hadn't seen any deer tracks in the area. We figured if the snow was too deep for the deer, it was probably too deep for the coyotes as well. Maybe we better go try a different area.
So just take a shot?
Go ahead. Several miles away, as we were snowmobiling to a new spot, a coyote running away caught my eye, so I jumped off the sled and got set up for a shot in case it appeared again. After a few minutes it did. It was still on the move and I was unable to get a good range on it because of all the snow. Needless to say, I missed the shot. We kept going to the spot we wanted to check out, hiked to another vantage point, and did some calling. It was when we had given up on the area and turned around that we spotted a coyote that had come in from behind us. We had stopped calling a few minutes earlier, and it was still trying to find where the calls had come from. The problem was, we were out in the open for where it appeared and couldn't move. It finally just headed on out to our right with other places in mind to go as it quickly disappeared. We grabbed our gear and hurried in the direction it went, hoping to find it again or find a spot to set up on to call it in. The problem was this area is very flat, and so there was nothing to hide behind and nothing to get us high enough to give us a good vantage point. It was actually a couple deer that went on alert that gave us a clue as to where it was. We had spotted the two deer that were just feeding when they suddenly got nervous and took off. Watching that area, sure enough, the coyote appeared out of a depression it had been in. It was a good 400 yards off and just hunting up food as near as we could tell. This is when we probably played it wrong. We closed the gap as much as we could, and then feeling a little rushed, Jacob went ahead and settled in for a shot. We had the same problem as before. The flat, snowy landscape made it very difficult to get an accurate range. After the coyote ran off, we realized we probably should have had a little more patience and tried calling it in closer. Coyotes are all fur and very little body, so the closer you can get to them, the better. But it was a learning experience for us. As I haven't done a ton of coyote hunting, every mistake teaches you a little. Maybe next time we'd play it a little smarter. Heading off a few more miles, I had another spot in mind where I'd seen coyotes in the past. Again, we hiked up to a good vantage point, set up, and started the calls going. We sat and watched for some time overlooking the area that allowed us to see a lot of country. Finally, a coyote howled off in the distance, then another, and another. They were well over a half-mile away somewhere out there in front of us. Then another group answered all the howls about a half-mile to our left. After some careful looking, we were able to spot both groups. Every time we made some calls, they would start howling back. The group to our left watched for a while, but then eventually just disappeared out of sight and we never did see them again. However, the group straight in front of us kept watching in our direction and howling back to us. There was one very vocal coyote between the three that we could see. However, as interested in answering us as they were not interested in coming our direction. It may have been a territory thing where there were so many coyotes in the area, or maybe I just wasn't doing the right calls. Either way, we couldn't get them to move our way. Eventually, we watched as they bedded up on a little point about a mile off.
Just don't, I think we're just too far to get them here, so we might move a little closer, see what we can do. There's a lot of coyotes, just can't get them here.
There was a small ridge between us and the bedded up coyote. If we could get to the top of that, maybe we could make something happen. In most places, there wasn't more than a foot of snow. While that's enough to make it tiring to hike, slow and steady will get you there. However, when we hit the slope with a lot of drifted snow, it became increasingly difficult.
This is ridiculous. We just gotta get up on top of this knob.
When we hit a really deep drift, crawling was the only option.
Yes, we've lost some pride today. Alright, we'll see if we can walk for a little bit.
Once on top, the snow was much more manageable. Now we were able to get back into the hunting mode. The key was trying to stay hidden behind big sagebrush and the few trees we had, while we tried to cut the distance to the bedded up coyotes. Once to a good vantage point, we hunkered down in some thick sagebrush and ranged the coyotes. They were still too far off, probably 600 yards. So trying to play it smart, we figured we were close enough to call them in. By now, 2 of them had gotten up and were actually moving away from us, while one stayed bedded up on its vantage point. Trying several rounds of injured rabbit calls and such, I had no luck in getting the coyotes to even react much. The 2 that were up and moving just kind of disappeared in the sagebrush, but the bedded up dog stayed put. With it not acting like it wanted to go anywhere soon, we decided we better try to get in closer. Maybe it would stay put and allow us to sneak into range for a shot. We were running out of daylight and needed to make something happen. Fortunately, we were able to sneak into the draw between us and get out of sight, and then we quickly closed the gap until we'd gone to the point of having no cover left.
Well, that didn't work out so well. You'd think it was a big bull elk the way we were trying to sneak in and put the work in to get this thing. We cut it down to about 350 and we're just trying to get to this bush right here so we could get an angle to shoot it, and it saw us. We were like 20 yards away from here and it stood up and took off the other way. So after a lot of time and effort post-holing through some nasty snow, we turned around and go back.
It was about 3 weeks before Jacob and I could get out again, and what a change. In that time, things had warmed up a bit with a lot of snow melting off the hillsides. Now we found ourselves hiking up to a vantage point on dry ground in some cases, and where there was snow, a frozen, thick, crusty layer that we didn't even sink into. A far cry from the first time we'd hunted. However, this snow was very loud, and we weren't sure how much that would affect our ability to get set up without scaring everything nearby off before we even got there. Getting some elevation, we hunkered down in some big rocks, set up the electronic collar, and started it playing some fighting magpie sounds. Sure enough, about 5 minutes later, a coyote appeared a long ways off below us. It was heading in, trying to locate where the noise was coming from. It was still a half mile off, so we had a lot of work to do. It looked our direction for some time before finally swinging to our right. I think it was just a little unsure of what it was hearing and not seeing, and just didn't feel comfortable yet. It sat down a couple times to watch our direction, but we just couldn't seem to get it to commit. Jacob even tried some injured rabbit calls, but this coyote wasn't falling for it.
Alright, so that coyote is actually bedded up about, we're guessing 700 to 800 yards off. Just the setup isn't quite right. It's unsure of what's going on, and so it's just bedded up and is watching. And we're in no position to be able to move anywhere without being seen, so we're gonna call it a learning experience and move on to another spot.
We set up in another spot several miles away, but the only thing we called in were crows and magpies. We did spot a coyote on the far ridge, and so we hiked that direction to get closer and make another setup. Hiking a good mile over and onto another ridge, we spotted the coyote and very carefully snuck in as close as we could. We were hoping that if we were close when we started the calls, maybe it would come in better, and that's when we spotted a second coyote.
All right, so we've got 2 coyotes out here, one that's probably 700-800 yards off, and another that might be as close as 300 yards. It kind of went around to our right and out of sight. We snuck in quite a ways to get closer before we started calling.
The first coyote disappeared in the flats in front of us. It was still there somewhere, we just couldn't see it. The second one was much further off, but it was in a good spot to be able to see if it did come into our calls. We watched it hunt mice for some time and actually saw it catch a few, and then we started the calls. We were surprised when there was no reaction at all. It didn't even look our way. Pulling out our reeds, we tried the louder rabbit in distress calls, and even that didn't work. It quickly became apparent that with the direction of the wind and the distance to the coyote, it just couldn't hear us. We still thought the other coyote could appear at any time, however, as it was closer, so we just kept an eye out for it. After quite some time and no reaction from the distant coyote and no sightings of the other, we finally picked up our gear. At this point, we had nothing to lose. We figured if it was too far to hear us, maybe we could just get up and walk right towards it and it wouldn't even see us. At least it was worth a shot. We were actually quite surprised when in fact we were able to get a lot closer. Using the available vegetation as a little bit of cover and walking towards it whenever it was busy hunting, we suddenly found ourselves just over 300 yards off. That's when Jacob spotted movement, as the other coyote that had disappeared earlier was just 200 yards away to our right, and it hadn't seen us either. Jacob quickly got set up with his shooting sticks and took aim.
It's coming our way. Coming right to us. You got it. Just stay put for a second, just watch.
With that coyote down, we looked for the other one. We couldn't see it, but there was still a good chance it was nearby. When I spotted its ears through some grass, Jacob handed me his gun and told me to try taking it. It took a minute before it gave me a shot, and I was afraid I was going to lose sight of it, so I quickly took it. Hurrying over to the edge of the draw to see if it was hit or still visible at least, we did spot blood, and a fair amount of it.
We came over and there's blood, so maybe he is right here close.
Jacob followed the tracks while I stayed put up high so I could be ready for another shot if it came running out. Long story short, we followed its tracks for probably a mile and a half until it went through a bared off section and I lost track. Guess I didn't hit it as good as I'd hoped.
Couldn't get that coyote. It just kept going. We cut its tracks and trailed it for probably a mile and a half or something, and then it hit a bare spot and just still going. We're heading back now to Jacob's coyote. He was dead on, so we're about there now. Go check it out. Yeah, you drilled it. Man. Yeah, that's a perfect shot. All right, here you go. Here's Jacob's very hard-earned coyote. We put on a lot of miles. I know there's way easier ways to hunt coyotes than what we did. We put a lot of hiking on, and this one especially, and the other one that I hit, you know, we've been stalking them, what do you think, 3 hours, 4 hours?
Oh yeah, yeah, at least. I mean, it's almost 5, and we started probably by 2 to 1.
It was, yeah, so we put a lot of time in, and you know, trying to sneak in. They were a lot further away than we thought. You know, they couldn't even hear us when we started the calls. And anyways, we ended up just sneaking in on them. That's just how it worked out. And Jacob made a good shot. Way to go, Jacob. Good job.
Thanks.
That's going to wrap up our coyote episode this year. If you liked what you saw, please subscribe to the Jared Scott Outdoors YouTube channel.